Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here for one cause, symbiotic culture. And my name is Shannon Procise, and super honored and excited that each of you have come today to share your time with us and also to hopefully be inspired to be a part of this powerful shared vision of building community and bringing in the new way of doing business and the new way of living in community and collaborating and sharing in this place of abundance. And so what got me so excited, real quick, I'm going to just share my story of why I'm here is, we have a love your neighbor community, and in our community, an individual shared something about what's going on in the food. And my heart just was, growing up with sometimes lack of food was like, oh my gosh, this is something that I want to be a part of shifting, and had the opportunity of meeting Richard. And I know many of you know him and his amazing work. And I was like, this man, I believe, has the key to help solve some of what's going on. And so thank goodness reached out to him, and you guys, some of you will hear where he's at and what he's done and what he's accomplished and here in the United States. And thank you, Richard, so much. And so we're here today to get into, last week we had our first meeting and kind of setting the tone. And so I'll plug that replay in once Richard gets talking. Now we're really getting into some of the training that's here. So we're going to talk about what is a symbiotic culture, what unites us. We're actually going to do a breakout room, so you get to meet some of these really cool people that are here, and there's some amazing people. You're going to learn about how to get involved, individual, street, neighborhood, and bioregional, what that looks like. And then we're going to dive right into a training. Again, I'll share some of the resources towards the end, how we're still connecting. I know we're working on the communication piece. We're hoping in the next couple of weeks to have some of that as we're growing. So with that, Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to introduce everybody to a couple folks. What's happening is last Friday, I think the majority of the folks were from your community and your network, Shannon. I've invited people from my network. So I just want everybody to kind of realize that we're kind of bringing together across networks, which is really cool. So why symbiotic culture? Well, for me, what I've noticed is that not just in the United States, but worldwide, the predominant culture is one of separation. So I think this is the main challenge, is that it's the belief that we actually are separate. Now, of course, we function individually and take care of our business and our lives and our businesses and organizations. But I'm talking about a philosophic question that all you see is all you get. So it's a materialistic way of looking at things that separates everything into parts. What I realized, as I mentioned a lot of you last time when I was in Sri Lanka, they've really addressed that by finding a way for a community to come together where that's not the basis of it. It's not separation. It's actually love. It's the higher aspect of love where mutual benefit is natural, where we think that way, where we feel that in our hearts. So for the last 30 years, I've been working in community to overcome what I think is the central problem of humanity, which is this fragmentation, the separation between us. I believe that what's happening also is that this fragmentation, this separation, it's also manufactured by political, religious, and business factions on the earth that want us to be divided. It makes us easier to govern, and it also makes us great consumers. But from my point of view, there's more to life, and many of you, there's more to life than just things. So why symbiotic culture is I saw a real need to bring people together, to unify people and organizations in a local community around shared values and principles, which we're going to get into in a little bit. So symbiotic culture really is a way of living. And many of you are already doing this in your own realms of business, your community, your organization. What we're talking about is extending this ability to practice this kind of culture of mutual benefit to larger and larger collectives until this becomes the new norm. Of course, it's a long-term project, but we don't have to wait for the whole planet to change. We can start and we can accelerate and extend that capacity for building symbiotic culture right now in our lives. So that's a very personal decision. So happy to be here. So what we've discovered by understanding other community development movements around the world, primarily Sarvodha and Sri Lanka, how they work, we were looking for shared principles and values from which to have like an operating system for how we build community. It's really important today, and I know this because I used to run nonprofits, in the secular civic culture, there's a real challenge in introducing any kinds of principles or values for fear that somehow someone's going to impose one view, religious or faith view, on another. We broke through that in a mainstream community in 2006 in Northern Nevada in Reno. We had 100 leaders. We asked everybody, what's the central problem of society and of our town at the time? And they said it was disunity. So we had small breakout groups, and we went through this process over months to identify what are shared principles and shared values that cross the spectrum from people who have religious faith, people who are spiritual but not religious, to people who are atheist. What can they all agree upon? And what we came up with are 8 shared principles, and without going in details. So the golden rule is primary in the sense that it reflects this embeddedness and mutual relationship that we have with each other in community. People could consider this a practical aspect of civilization. The golden rule as a principle goes back thousands of years. It crosses every religious faith tradition, wisdom traditions. But it's something that's really solid, and it's the basis for intentional mutual benefit. It just continues, love thy neighbor, acknowledge something bigger than yourself. For many people, that's God. If you're in recovery groups, that would be a higher power. If you're in a bioregion, like a county level, then you could consider your bioregion as something bigger than yourself that you're part of. All the living things, the human beings that live there, the culture, the watershed. That's something that's really important, to have something that's bigger than us that we're part of, because that puts our ego in check, and it really allows us to embrace all life. The other thing about the shared principles, community-based local economy, it's really important that we've recognized that global problems that we see can't be solved globally. It has to be solved locally. And thank goodness, because that's something we can engage. We have agency there. We don't really have agency for these larger, extended global, system problems, but we can focus on where we live. And if you aggregate the energy within a community by bringing all the organizations and people together, what we envision is this happening in thousands of communities across the world that develop a natural, organic, bottom-up federation of communities that's transnational. Focus on what we have in common. That's an extremely important principle. So within symbiotic culture, we don't focus on conversations about politics or religion, because there's an orchestrated environment to divide us. And that's a standard method of operation of political leadership for 10,000 years. There's a trend of it. It's called divide and rule. We don't have to do that. We don't have to focus on that. So we're focusing on what we have in common, not what divides us. And we're building a connected organism, not a separate competing organization in the community.
Yep.
So the 5 shared values also came from looking at faith traditions, civic culture, even like integrity as the definition. It actually came from looking at the Louisiana State Troopers, part of their value statement of what integrity was. So you could see values are predominant. What we're saying is that in the symbiotic culture, we need to be able to bring these values up to greater awareness and strengthen our capacity through sharing and supporting each other to demonstrate these values. These values are aspects of consciousness that are powerful, and love as an operating principle is a power for unification. It's just that the culture that we live in really makes us sacrifice, or feel like we have to sacrifice these values in order to survive, to compete, to try to dominate potentially others in the way we do business and these kinds of things. Well, we don't have to live that way. So by highlighting these values, it's really important. We can really identify them individually as part of building community. So they're not abstract. This isn't like an abstract course on values. This is looking at the success of the Sarvodaya movement in Sri Lanka, which really is the world's most successful values-based community movement. They have a little different system that they introduced, but it's the same principle. So we take these principles and values and we put them in the context of building community. Over the last 40 years, from other community movements, our work in community, we've identified these sectors that people normally aggregate around. Some people are passionate about food and water, arts and culture, neighbors connecting with neighbors, education, housing, clean and healthy environment, helping people who are marginalized in society. This is how we've organized community. What you'll learn in a little bit is that what we've done is we've learned how to build networks within each of these sectors by connecting existing organizations, both the leaders of nonprofits, for-profits, local government departments, to be able to connect them in a way that creates a distributed network that's simple and really straightforward. We're going to get into one of these sectors, which is local food and water. This was just the background. I think this is really important to ground our work in understanding these shared principles and values and this bigger picture. Let's talk about symbiotic network building, which is part of symbiotic culture. Symbiotic culture has to do with, remember, we're talking about a local bioregional area. For the purpose of this discussion, we're talking about the area of a county. That's the geographic area. Maybe in other countries, they have different units, but could be several municipalities. So the first thing about network building is it's intentional and purposeful. It's a value-based network building a culture of mutual benefit. The cultural aspect of what we do is key. If we want to develop a new coherent culture of mutual benefit, we have to make that a priority as part of the concrete actions that we're doing. It's not a separate thing. It's not philosophy. It's a way of life. And all of us, to one extent or another, are already doing this. This is a matter of building a support system, focusing on a local community level. We're able to support each other in concrete ways while we build this culture of mutual benefit. We call that a symbiotic culture. Again, focus on what we share in common, not what divides us. All too often, especially online in forums where groups have channels to communicate, people are incessantly preoccupied with focusing on politics and religious beliefs. You've got to realize that social media has been weaponized. The number one thing that social media wants for us in order for it to be successful in its advertising and selling us as a product is anger. They want us mad. They want us angry and fighting with each other because that makes more clicks and engagement. So we have to learn how to deal with that. And we're creating this symbiotic culture where that's not within the parameters of what we're doing. Rest assured that you're safe in this space from any kind of debates like that. It's on purpose. So again, we're not creating a new organization. It's an organism. So it's a distributed network, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. It's not a formal legal structure or a new silo. It's very simple and straightforward. It is so hard in the beginning to see how this is even possible when we're so used to institutional change by nonprofits, by business, by corporations, by government. Once I share this with you, you will see that it's surprisingly simple and straightforward. We empower each other and the community. It's a common awakening of ourselves and each other and our community, our street, our family, our neighborhood, our region. And it's natural. This is a natural way, and it relates to how ecosystems are in nature. My background is in biology, so some of these ideas are in alignment with natural systems. Leadership's focused on giving first rather than receiving. I know many of you, maybe all of you, may already be looking at life this way. The challenge with the current culture is that we're led to believe that we need to take from others in order to satisfy our own needs, to survive, to thrive, and our families' needs, to take care of our family. We're led to believe that we have to compete in this battlefield. I'm here to say, and many of you already know this, but leadership focus on giving and sharing actually leads to greater abundance. That's the paradox. Many of you know this. When you give and you don't have an expectation of immediately receiving it back, it normally happens, but that takes trust. It takes some faith in universe, whether you have a faith tradition, God, however you look at it. This is very important to have that sense that there is abundance and that this approach actually works on a practical level. It's not just philosophy, it really works. And the last thing, it's probably maybe this is the most important for everybody. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. Now, if we were creating a new nonprofit organization, there's so many levels to that. I've founded 3 of them, and it's a lot of work, like legal structures and governance and fundraising and staff and all these things. There's none of that in building a symbiotic network. one way to get involved as an individual, definitely join the calls. We're planning on doing this weekly on Fridays. That's a way to plug in and learn more. And at some point, we're going to develop some online social network communication channels to be able to participate as well. So today I'm going to talk briefly about the process of organizing a street. And then we're going to jump right into the rest of the gathering on a first part of the training of building a local food system network. So this was an activity we did for many years in Northern Nevada. As you can see, we called it Get to Know Your Neighbor Day. It was basically not just a one-time party. It actually developed a movement of about 100 streets in our region. In fact, there wasn't a category in the Guinness Book, but we were actually up there, and Parade Magazine did a story in the United States on our effort. It was 2007, this happened. What's interesting about it is, yes, we're asking that you step up on your street, so you don't necessarily have to organize a full-on neighbor network of multiple streets, but we did. So we went to the regional level and built a network by connecting with organizations like Neighborhood Watch. There were a ton of community groups, and we all jointly launched this. Ultimately, it was each street that got involved. So here are the steps. I'm just going to review this quickly so we can go on to the main part of this gathering on a food system network. So this is the level of the street, 20 homes around you. What you do is you would identify your street pot. Ideally, you'd have 2 or 3 neighbors that you already know. Now, obviously, we all live in different configurations. We could be in a suburban type neighborhood. We can be in a townhouse development, apartment complex. So obviously, there are a lot of different kinds of situations. So what we did was the small group on a street just chooses the first monthly event, and it could either be a potluck at your home if you're comfortable. Some people did like an ice cream social. People did a barbecue on their front lawn. We had people doing, they lived on a cul-de-sac and they just closed the street off and did a block party. Some people live in condo associations so that there's like a meeting hall. The idea is that it's real creative about bringing people together. So you select the date for the first event and you produce a one-page flyer. So we'll be able to have that material for you so that you can move forward if you choose to. We'll have that one-page flyer already designed so you can input your particulars. Then what you do is you would walk door to door, and here is the real challenge for many people, which is, yes, many of us know a lot of our neighbors and we're comfortable with that. Well, some of us are not comfortable with knocking on the door of a neighbor who's a stranger. The first time I did this myself, before it went public, I went to all of my neighbors. I was alone. It was just myself. I didn't have a team at the time. And I remember I got maybe the first year, I think I had like 6 individuals. I started to do this annually. Then the next year had 20. Basically, it just grew from there. As a result of my own experience, I realized that, yeah, that is a challenge. I think it was the Dalai Lama said that we could jet around the world, but sometimes it's hard to get to know our neighbor. It's a really interesting comment, but this is part of that process of stepping up into providing this kind of focus on unifying your street. And that's just one level that you might consider doing. What happened as a result of starting the first year with doing these annual events, it actually led to it becoming an ongoing street level pod where people actually kept in touch with each other. They literally were able to identify needs and offers. So what's happening here is that there's a lot of isolation, especially after COVID. There could be seniors that are alone, that could be matched with teenage kids in a family down the street to help them get groceries, things like that. Just really natural things. Walking dogs together. There was a case of single mothers who formed a babysitting co-op. I mean, they went from like being strangers to forming a co-op to help take care of their kids. And then the other thing is sharing food. And that's a big deal. Backyard farming is really important. And we found that was a connector, like our neighbor across the street in Reno. Wow, she was really great at growing, leafy green vegetables. We were great at tomatoes. So we started doing some sharing that way. This is really important, and you'll see how this connects later on. So let's go on. That was just an introduction. We're going to focus the rest of the meeting on a local food system network. So now what we've done is we've taken scale. We've gone from the person, we've gone to the street level where you can operate at the level of street and building that culture. And now we're talking about a bioregion. Really, technically, it would be the level of a county. So in this case, with Shannon, we're going to talk about Brevard County, Florida. So what is a local food system network? It's a regenerative and market-based approach to increase the local farm, ranch, and value-added food production, like honey, and consumption of food. It maps and connects all the elements of a food system into a marketplace that's coherent, where every single organization in that area of food become connected and start sharing, so that the region becomes increasingly resilient, food self-sufficient. If ever there was a time for us to be concerned about supply chain, especially in food, it's now. And that's why this is going from being just a kind of a nice idea, as it was a decade ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, even a year ago. Now it's going to be seen as necessary. So what we're part of could be just ahead of the curve, but we're going to be joined by thousands of communities that are sensing the same thing. Now, on the bottom, it says inclusive of conventional and regenerative. I bring this up, it's real important. When we built our local food system network in 2005, there was a group of folks that wanted this exclusively, that the producers be organic only. And we chose not to do that. We had chose to have also conventional farmers that use different kinds of chemical fertilizers as well as regenerative. And I'm really thankful and glad that we did that. The reason is the first person that got involved was the oldest time farmer in Northern Nevada, family farm for 100 years. He was literally a monocrop farmer that sold wholesale outside of our region there in Northern Nevada. And he was using conventional means of fertilizer. If we had excluded him because we had a particular view that we just organic farmers only, what I'm about to share would never have happened if we excluded him. By including him, he was a conventional farmer, didn't even have any connections to the local community. He ended up becoming the largest organic farmer in the region with tons of relationships with community supported agriculture, farm to table programs, and you name it. He became the poster child for it. And it just shows you that regenerative can also mean the ecosystem itself, all of the organizations together, not just a specific application of conventional fertilizer versus, say, regenerative organic ag. And I know that's a sticking point for many people. This is a strategic concern. These networks evolve from conventional to regenerative by learning from each other. That process of learning can't happen if you make it an exclusive club. That's just what we found that works. So what happens in the region, really quickly, I'll go through this, is there's a lot of catalytic effects. Top left, the city of Reno built a public farmers market because of all the interest. Community supported agriculture, as you see in the top right, where people have a direct subscription, families to local farmers. It went from a few CSAs to almost 20. The number of farmers involved in the food system went from 3 to like 150 over like a 5 to 10 year period. On the bottom left is a food cooperative that was building at the same time. It became the fastest growing, and it could still be the fastest growing food cooperative in the United States. It's in Reno. And then on the right, additional like farmers markets expanded. So some of the principles of this kind of networking: open, accepting, and available. You're capable of having empathy for others. You actually enjoy connecting others, which would be really helpful. To be able to go beyond your own likes and dislikes is really important, because sometimes we're in silos where we might not like somebody else's political or religious beliefs. Those are irrelevant in this context. What's relevant is growing and consuming more local food over a period of time. It's a function. You all should have access to this, and we'll make it available. It's really how you go from scattered clusters in one sector, in this case, food and water in a community. How do you go from scattered clusters to a coherent network? The fact that you have scattered clusters, the first step is to do research. And we're going to do that and demonstrate it right now. So this is the first step of how to form a local food system network. Could you pull up Brevard County, Florida? As you can see, it's on the coast, also known as Space Coast. There's Cape Canaveral, and it includes the large city of Melbourne. What I noticed about this is that we're focusing on this whole area of this county for a local food system network, looking at producers and consumers. What I noticed is that Orlando is a large city, and we'll get into this into a second. It's in Orange, I think it's Orange County. Yeah, so here's some questions, and it's region specific. Every region and bioregion like this is really unique in its assembly of its resources. Maybe you'll find that the level of county might not be enough. There might not be enough diversity of food production. Maybe you can do an adjacent county. It really depends. Right now, we're focusing on Brevard. So let's do a Google search. I'm going to show you how to start mapping your food system. In quotes, Brevard County, unquote, and then and local food system network. So the first thing to do is you really want to identify, is there already something like this in your county? Because if there is, you want to work with them and support them and help them. Click on the first one. This is actually interesting. It shows you in Orlando, which is outside, it's the adjacent county. The city of Orlando, Florida has a local food systems program. That is different than an actual network. Program means this municipality, Orlando, has some goals. They want to increase community garden plots. They want to increase farmers markets, food hubs, food distributors, and urban farms. I want you to kind of start learning the lingo. Just because the city of Orlando has a page that says local food systems, that's not the same as creating an actual vibrant network. Okay, so this is another data point. So if you go down, you'll see, oh, wow, you start, you document this in a spreadsheet. So if you're somebody who's a connector and wants to initiate this in your region, but you don't like spreadsheets, then you have to build your core team, find somebody that can help you who's good with spreadsheets or, likes doing that kind of thing. Start identifying some of the players. Go to the Food and Nutrition Services for the school district. Here's one, Community Garden Network of Brevard. If you did a search of community gardens and you had a list of 10 of them, let's say you had a list of 10 community gardens, well, then you'd have 10 people and organizations to connect or contact. It's better sometimes to find a community garden network. See, that's a cluster. That's a subsector of the food system, and they've already done it. They've already connected. You have more leverage as a sector cluster, which is a community garden network. It's a cluster of organizations rather than trying to get each individual community garden on board. We had the same thing happen in Reno, where we had 20 farmers markets, but there was a nonprofit that actually was a connector of every single one of them. So instead of inviting 20 leaders of farmers markets or community gardens to the first meeting, we were able to find the person that already had networked them, and they come to the meeting, and it makes this process more manageable because the goal is to find maybe 5 key super connectors from different clusters. Clusters, again, those are already existing connectors of organizations. There's the food assistance program. This is the governmental aspect. Well, government can be challenging. It's only challenging if they're directing something. Bureaucracies, even if it's city or county level, they just really don't know how to do this. But we should still involve them as partners because we're the ones that are helping to initiate it. It's a people's movement. The government and their departments are key like anything else. It's just that they're not in a position to direct it. Let's do another search. Let's do Brevard County and local food system. Changing your search algorithm. Here's a local college. Colleges sometimes are associated with ag extension programs. So agriculture extension and farm bureaus are connected to governmental divisions that have the capacity to create rapid connection. There's the Brevard County Farm Bureau. There's information on Florida Ag, its overview and stats. Here's the federal level, U.S. Department of Agriculture. We had USDA folks involved, and a lot of times they're great. These universities, government, these profiles by U.S. Department of Agriculture, you'll find a ton of information. It's like a breadcrumb trail that you're on. You're trying to first identify and map the assets. The other kinds of things that you'd want to search for would be like restaurant associations. You want to find out, are there existing farmers market associations and networks? Are there community garden networks already? Are there farmer networks and hubs already? Are there food co-ops? Any kinds of organizations that are already networked. And then you put them in a spreadsheet like Shannon showed. We're not going to do that today, but the next step is to figure out, how do you take 50 different data points, like organizations, farms, and projects? How do you actually figure out how to put them together to know who to contact, to invite to the first meeting, to explore with them the building of a local food system network.
So this is what we have. We just did company association, name, first name, some of the information as far as notes. We don't have a local association, but we do have a state association that we found. We have a lot of farms and we have some pretty big markets and stuff here. We'll go back and add what you add, but anything else that you see on here that maybe we're missing in the spreadsheet or we need to consider also in the search?
Just one of the general things is you want to take data like this, like separate individual organizations, and start clustering them. So you want to create categories. So you'd have producers and consumers, producers, farms, ranches, value-added producers, and then consumers. I'm not talking about individual people like us. I'm talking about restaurants, farmers markets, grocers. Then you got like food co-op. Then you have institutional buying. Who's buying food? Hotels, that's a subcategory. You got hotels, you got schools, you've got Brevard County, the school system, the public school system is getting food somewhere. I'm talking about the purchasing agent. So that'd be like the purchasing agent of these large institutions. You're simply making these connections happening. You're building this basis for a food system, a network. And eventually it'll become a marketplace. The idea is you're helping connect these organizations that start doing business together. If they do business together, they're going to start increasing their productive capacity. That's how you can use a market system to encourage greater food production locally. Let's look at a food system. Let's look down at 2.21. Yes. I'm in the middle of the page. These are all of the sub-sectors in the food system. So community and school gardens, that's self-explanatory. Community supported agriculture, which is subscription farming, connecting families that buy subscriptions in local farms. Composting is a subcategory. Farmers markets, food production. There's canning and meat processing. That's happening locally. A lot of us are doing that, but it's part of the food system. Food security and storage. There's a ton of groups that do foraging and gleaning. There are like gleaning groups where there's a bunch of fruit trees, say, in your county, and it's like all of a sudden they're dumping a ton of fruit. A lot of it goes to waste. There are like groups that come in and they collect the fruit and give it away. So that's called gleaning. Hydroponics, aquaponics is a subsector. Land sharing for food production. Local food in restaurants. There's marketing. There could be marketing groups in local food. Their subsets would be permaculture and regenerative ag. So there's raising livestock, preparing healthy food. There are groups that just are all about nutrition and food preparation. Local food banks. We didn't even mention the issue of food insecurity, hunger, and backyard farming. This kind of sub-sector list, what's amazing is in Sarvodia, in the 60s when they started and they developed a list of these sectors and food was included, I think half the people there were not even literate at that time. But in the 60s, they took people who were like some pre-literate who literally were able to take a food sector and then identify like 50 subcategories. Like we're talking about people in villages who are literally doing these mind mapping exercises. And what it shows is that this is really feasible and it's natural, and it's a matter of getting into this vibe of seeing this system and identifying the components like that. What this is really about is building this open, transparent system in the food area where all the food related organizations, businesses, local governments can connect and find out about each other. Once that process of connecting happens, natural synergies emerge. Once the people get to know each other, this could also be called building your trust network. People build trust. They start building these relationships. Remember, it's also building a marketplace, because to go from where we're at now, where in many counties in the United States and around the world, we are dependent on external inputs to feed ourselves. Like Hawaii depends on 90% imports. What's going to happen if there's a breakdown in the boats and the planes? Maybe there's less diesel available. What the heck are we going to do? So the answer is you got to get all hands on deck first. You have to be building a trust network. So your role is to provide that space because they can't do it themselves because they're already busy. These are busy professionals involved in the food system. They don't know how to do it. So you're providing a new function to connect them. Once they're connected, the next step after you've built the network is for an internal audit. What are we importing? What are we exporting? The system that we've been a part of for 70 years was based on the free exchange globally of goods and services. And we've gotten used to it. This kind of thing where we say, well, I get my cherries from Chile, I get my coffee from Colombia, I get my whatever. Those days are done. We're going to have to rationally, systematically, once we get our food system together, figure out what can we produce? Can we grow hothouse tomatoes in a greenhouse? If that's the case, then you've already built the trust network. And then naturally, what will happen is somebody might say, I'd like to do that business. Capital will flow into that because now capital sources are exposed and it's a collaborative effort. It may be a private enterprise that'll be emerging, could be co-ops, could be collectives. We're not attached to the economic form. We're attached to growing more food locally and consuming more food locally in a systematic way and helping the community to get to that place. I don't know the answer as to how much can be produced more locally in Brevard County or any county. That's not the point. The point is to start on this journey. We still depend on the vertically integrated global system. This is not a localization effort that's opposed to the existing system. How can you be opposed to reality? We live in a system where, we've got Costco and we got Walmart and all those kinds of things. That's reality. This is not a purist thing, but we're going in this direction ourselves to see what we can do. It's not against the old system. It's for a new one.